Hi everyone, my name is Jorge Murillo and today I'm presenting my poster titled A Causal Test of Competitive versus Cooperative Hippocampal-Striatal Dynamics in Human Memory. So to start off, episodic memory is involved in learning autobiographical information, which relies on a network that includes the hippocampus. And procedural memory, which is involved in learning skills and habits, relies on a network that includes the caudate. And indirect evidence has actually shown us that hippocampal-dependent episodic and caudate-dependent procedural networks interact. However, causal evidence of their interactions in healthy humans is still missing. Also, it's unclear what regions mediate their interactions. So in our study, we decided to use network-targeted stimulation to affect the hippocampus and see whether this also affects interactions between the networks. So given this, we hypothesized a few things. First, that repetitive transcranial magnetic stimulation of the left inferior parietal cortex, which is functionally connected to the hippocampus, would increase episodic network resting state functional connectivity. Second, that inferior parietal cortex, RTMS, would boost episodic memory compared to procedural memory. Third, that inferior parietal cortex, RTMS, would change episodic and procedural resting state functional connectivity. Finally, that RTMS induced caudate and precuneus and caudate and thalamus resting state functional connectivity changes would be associated with changes in episodic and procedural memory. So in this study, we had 26 participants that received inferior parietal cortex RTMS and 15 that received vertex RTMS, and you can see where they got stimulated. And participants experienced an MRI session and a behavioral session prior to and following 3 to 4 RTMS sessions, and a final behavioral session after 7 to 14 days of completing the MRI session. And I want to quickly note that we used proxy networks to represent the episodic network, in our case the hippocampal network, or HN, and to represent the procedural network, in our case the caudate network, or CN. And both networks contain nodes that are intrinsically connected to each structure at rest. Participants experienced an episodic memory task that engages the hippocampus and its network, and a procedural memory task, which engages the caudate and its network. And our data actually shows that parietal stimulation not only increased hippocampal connectivity, but also between the hippocampus and the caudate. However, stimulation did not increase connectivity between the caudate and its network, showing that the effects of stimulation did not generalize to all of the networks, which was important to see. So regarding memory, we compared the inferior parietal cortex group and vertex group, and what we noted was that the inferior parietal cortex group was more likely to have divergences in memory performance changes, which was very cool to see because the vertex group had nothing like that. And so we wanted to see if the memory changes and the resting state functional connectivity changes were associated. So we looked at regions that were anatomically connected to both networks, such as the precuneus in this case and the thalamus in the next slide. And when looking at the functional connectivity strength of the caudate and precuneus, what we notice is that it can predict memory performance changes. In other words, that the stronger the functional connectivity, the more the memory performance is diverged. And when comparing the inferior parietal cortex group to the vertex group, we noted the vertex group really had no changes, while the inferior parietal cortex group had more significant changes. And we also saw the same patterns when looking at caudate and thalamus connectivity. Increases in connectivity were associated with improved episodic and decreased procedural memory. So our results support the idea that these networks do in fact interact. And this is the first causal demonstration of procedural and episodic memory network interactions. Also, caudate and precuneus and caudate and thalamus resting state functional connectivity modulate the preference to learn episodic over procedural information. Thank you for listening.